Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for dialing in and joining in this important conversation. Thank you to Hridayananda Maharaj and Krishna Devata for choosing to discuss this vital topic, child protection, in this way. And thank you to Maharaj and his team for kindly allowing us to host or moderate this on Maharaj's various platforms, in addition to Vedic Inquirer. As a moderator, I'll have a few questions from time to time that I might throw in, but will generally try to be unobtrusive and let the two of you explore various interrelated matters, such as how do we productively talk about such an emotionally charged issue as child protection? How do we balance justice and mercy and perhaps other considerations like public expectations when attempting to resolve child protection breaches? Perhaps we'll start with Krishna Devata. You're a Gurukul alumni, you're a mum and a long-serving advocate of child protection. Maharaj recently wrote an essay talking about the sort of constructive debate and so on. And I think you were keen to take up with him on a few points there.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm just happy to speak to Maharaj again. So, this is, I guess, a modern miracle. I think it's been like 20 years. Maybe we've seen each other in between sometimes. But, we've had a long-standing rapport and, ongoing discussion about the society we live in. And I've always found that I was able to speak candidly with Maharaj. So I wanted to invite you to speak about this topic because, we can spend a long time on social media, but we are familiar with this, what I call our living room talks. And I just thought that mood of discussion, just that we are family, and having an opportunity to find some understanding. So, yeah, I just wanted to start by appreciating that, Maharaj, that you're willing to come to the table because, I'm sure not many people would. So at this point. So I wanted to pick up about the article that you wrote or the essay you wrote because you talked about this, Brahminical conduct and discourse. So I wanted to just see if one of maybe Damodara, could you show us the 4 varnas and 4 ashrams?
Yes, just now finding it. Okay, hopefully that will come up any moment.
Okay, so obviously this is review for all of us, but the 4 varnas and 4 ashrams, and we can see clearly, Maharaj, so you would fall into the top lines, both lines, right? From Brahmin sannyas for your varna and ashram. But I would be very wondering where exactly do I fit in this chart?
Should I respond?
I mean,
please, Mark.
Yeah, I think you're also at the top. I mean, you're a Brahmin. Because there's actually some sannyasi in ISKCON that thinks falsely that the women don't have varnas, but of course it's nonsense because in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's whole concern is varna sankara, which literally in Sanskrit means varna mixing. Mm-hmm. So if women didn't clearly have varnas, you couldn't mix them. And there's all kinds of names in the Manu Samhita, like if a Brahmin lady marries a Kshatriya man or a Kshatriya lady marries there's all kinds of names. And so my experience with you is that you're very intelligent and principled. And so I would think of you as a Brahmin.
Okay. I understand that you would give me these kind of accolades, and I appreciate that, but I don't fit there, in practice. I've never been treated that way. I mean, I've been treated as a Vaisnava, but I mean, a Brahmin, I'm not Brahminically initiated. And so maybe we can go to the temple diagram. This is my experience.
Okay. Oh, if I could just make
before that, sure, go ahead. Sure.
And that is, I think we live in an age, post-industrial, post-sanity age, where people, society, including ISKCON, frankly, greater society, and even may not offer sincere souls the opportunity to do their very best.
Yes.
There are all kinds of complications. So I have always held you in high esteem. And so and you're a Vaishnavi. So of course I don't want to say I know you better than you know yourself, because that's, that people get it when someone tells you that. But yeah, I think as far as Brahminical initiation and everything, there's so many factors. There's so many factors that can lead one to a particular lifestyle, a particular situation vis-a-vis a spiritual movement or society. And so when I see you, I see all these excellent qualities that are really independent of this or that situation brought on by circumstances, in a sense, beyond our control.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I think before we go to that next visual that I mentioned, I wanted to share with you two distinct experiences within the ISKCON society. One of them is actually my first memory. So I was about a year old, and I was an infant, and my parents were living in the Berkeley Temple, right there on Stewart Street. And my first memory is being locked out of Mangalarti with my mother, because as a city street, for whatever reasons, the temple doors were locked at Mangalarti. That's my first memory. So one of my very early memories, by the time I was 3 years old, we were living in the Philadelphia temple. And I remember distinctly by 3 years old. So these are very early formative years. Sanskaras. So if you're familiar with the Philadelphia temple, it's an old hotel with the long hallway corridors. And I found myself in the hallway alone, face to face with a sannyasi. And even at that age, I wanted to disappear myself. I knew I was out of place, and I didn't know how to navigate that, crossing that path. And I already knew I didn't have a place, I didn't belong there. That he was given preferential treatment, and where I stood was secondary. I already knew that. So flash forward to February 2020. This was the last time I was in Vrindavan. And, it's a special, opportunity to attend Mangal Arti in the Holy Dham. So just also on a side note, there is some emergency work suddenly scheduled outside, so that's happening. I don't know if the audio is disturbing, but anyway, so I went to Mangal Arti, and there's this gap time for japa time, meditation time. So of course I remember there's no place for me in the temple room for japa. So I thought, okay, I remember Prabhupada's room. That's always usually a nice secluded place to chant. And I went in there, and you could have imagined that I walked into like a men's restroom. It was
into a what?
A men's restroom, like the audible gasp, okay? Like a experience of like, okay, I definitely shouldn't be here, okay? And then but if you can imagine, it's 5 o'clock in the morning in India. Okay, it's dark out. There's chowkidars. There's literally nowhere else for me to go. So I'm at this, so I'm walking around the whole temple compound, and I finally come to the Balaram Hall. And there's many ladies, and they're stringing garlands and talking. There's like a very jovial spirit. And then I look amidst all of the talking ladies, and there's one sannyasi, very jolly, just talking to all of the ladies at this time. So I just want to make a distinction that these messages of belonging and a place are given to us in a lot of different ways. So in that moment, I also knew that aside from protecting all of the men and their mind and their celibacy, our whole society is organized around protecting celibate men. Okay? So my only choice was really for me to chant my japa, to leave the temple grounds. Go ahead.
That's kind of like appalling. I mean, not you or your story, but I mean, what you described. Let me tell you a story. 1974, I came to San Francisco to celebrate Rath Yatra with Prabhupada and, of course, all the devotees. And so one day I was in Prabhupada's room, and the temple president of San Francisco team was sitting there with Prabhupada, just the two of us with Prabhupada. And he was sort of bragging that the temple is so strict that after Mongol Arati, they don't let the women chant japa in the temple, only the men chant japa in the temple. Mm-hmm. And Prabhupada looked at him as if he were crazy. And in a sense he was. So and Prabhupada said, like, why? Why do you do that? And of course, this temple president saw that, he was, rather than getting Prabhupada's admiration, Prabhupada was really wondering about him. And so he said, well, because the men become agitated. And I remember Prabhupada became disgusted. And he said, if they're such fools that these men are agitated because a woman is chanting Hare Krishna in Krishna's temple, he said, they should go to the jungle, they should go to the forest, let them leave. And so there's all these, if I can just speak frankly.
Yeah, of course.
Yes. I believe there's a lot of people in the Hare Krishna movement who imagine that they're strict followers of Prabhupada, but in some fundamental ways have really misunderstood Prabhupada.
Yeah.
And so I know I'm now acting as a guru in ISKCON. I won't do an infomercial, but so.
What did you say about the guru in ISKCON? I'm sorry.
I said I won't do an infomercial, for my guru services. So, I mean, I have.
Okay, so the jackhammering has started in my vicinity. Can you guys hear that, or is that just...
We can. You could probably mute yourself at least while you're not speaking.
Okay,
or something.
I'm gonna do that.
I think.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I think you have a good microphone, and even when the sound is going on, I can still hear you pretty well. So if you want to speak, please do so. I think that, okay, here's my take. The real symptom of a spiritual leader, an advanced Krishna conscious person, is not that they strictly keep women away, or they sort of, I don't know, just dress and conduct themselves in a way to build a high cultural wall of separation to keep out the non-devotees, or, I think among neophytes, that's taken as a sign of advancement. But the real advancement is to see everyone as Krishna's eternal servant. And so a man who cannot chant japa in a temple room with a woman is clearly a neophyte that really needs help. So I'm sorry if I feel very bad. I mean, to the extent that I represent ISKCON, I owe you lots of apologies. And I think it's horrible you have those experiences like the Philadelphia caper. I don't want to, brag, but I mean, if I am in a temple and I see a child, my first instinct is, I just feel natural affection for the child. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy, if I can just be honest, and a lot of nonsense, which masquerades as advanced Krishna consciousness. And actually, I mean, if anyone knew you, imagine this old song, like 59 by the Teddy Bears, to know him is to love him. So, I mean, I think anyone that actually knows you would be very fond of you and would appreciate you very much.
Maybe I can ask a quick bridging question, if that's okay to you, Maharaj. One of the things that really grabbed me in your essay was the following little paragraph. I have no intention of discouraging strong, robust debate on moral issues, such as punishment of devotee offenders. Rather, I seek to defend the necessary cultural conditions for Vaishnava debate to take place fairly. So this issue of cultural maturity, KD's mentioning here that what to speak of abuse, even just everyday participation, doesn't seem like an even playing field. It seems like some people have the full franchise and other people have to practically scrap to get the franchise. So I'm curious.
I just want to comment quickly. It's interesting because, for example, in the modern political arena, say in America, the left controls most of the media, obviously except for Fox News, but the right tends to dominate YouTube. And then the left tends to be very influential in the universities, but the right kind of controls talk radio. And so they're like, they each have their own battle stations.
So you go ahead, Katie.
Okay, so back in the day, in our living room talks, a lot of it was, we spent a lot of time with Shakuntala, and one of the crux of our focus at the time, we brought all the way to the GBC. We went all the way to Mayapur, and we spoke in front of the GBC body, and we spoke about H.D.Goswami, as we spoke about many, many times. But the reality is there's not freedom of speech in ISKCON. It's an authoritarian model that depends on the leader to be kind and pious. So that's a lot of trust. They take a lot of public trust to have an authoritarian position. So that's where, I have worked within the system, and I've gone through the venues available to me to be the loyal opposition, which I've always said I was, because criticism is a really easy way also for many things to be silenced. So, I've tried to very respectfully approach the GBC. And I didn't think it made 1 ounce of a difference 20 years ago or something about that. Not one difference. And so I really left for quite some time and, raised my children. And I keep going back. I went back when I lived in New York. I went back to Berkeley, and I've been contributing to the Rath Yatra Festival for several years, but I actually have to admit I quit that service, Maharaj, because I feel like an abused woman going back over and over. Why should I keep going back to be told once again? And because those are just anecdotal stories, Maharaj. Those are to illustrate in a personal way something that I'm sure in the comments you could see a whole book of stories about the ways that the women have been disrespected. So that's like even a diversion point. I'm sure we could do a whole podcast just on that. But this is to illustrate the culture that we're operating within.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because when we silence the women and the mothers, there's a direct repercussion on the children.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If I could just say that, I'm sure you'll be encouraged to hear that the problem is actually worse than you stated it. In the sense that it's a fact. I mean, the women not being heard is a disaster. The women are half of the society. They raise children. They raise the children, and if women are not respected and honored and appreciated, society will basically. Yeah,
I
please.
just want to make sure, a really important point, that men also raise the children.
Yes, you're absolutely right. No, you're absolutely right. And I was very fortunate. I had a really. Oh, by the way, say hello to your parents for me.
I will.
I had very, very good, loving parents, and of course the father and the mother. Absolutely right. But what I wanted to say to you is that the GBC don't listen to me either. And so, I mean, I've had the experience just in the last year of 3 times addressing the GBC properly, letters to the EC, on very important issues, and each time they were incapable of just even minimum courtesy. They were I mean, I know many GBC men, and many of them individually are nice. They're nice people and they're friends. But when they meet together, something goes very wrong. And like a distinction I want to make is that I don't think the GBC is illegitimate. There's a difference between bad government or poor government or inept government and illegitimate government. So I don't say the GBC is illegitimate, but I think objectively, clearly, they have major problems in dealing properly with the devotees of ISKCON. And it doesn't matter whether, it's me or you or, gender, how long you've been in the Hare Krishna movement. I can't get common decency out of them. I mean, to me, common decency is that when I write them a letter on a serious topic and objectively I'm giving them, it's important, and they don't answer me. I just give one simple example, anecdotal. Because I created this, anyway, whatever it is, Krishna West. And so because Prabhupada had said we should study the Catholic Church, see how they organize things in terms of orders, Jesuits, Franciscans, Dominicans, and so on. And because I knew even some conservative GBCs were in favor of that, I thought, well, we want to apply to become an order within ISKCON. I thought it was to the advantage of the conservatives because it would kind of domesticate Krishna West. So you kind of know where it is and there'd be boundaries and so on. And so I wrote a letter to the chairman and I said, we want to apply. He said, well, we'll form a committee and discuss it. And I didn't hear back. So I had to write again after a while. And then I was told that they wanted to discuss it. I'm a GBC emeritus. I actually know a lot more about the history of religion just from a scholarly point of view than they do. But they had decided that I should not be part of the discussion. So that whole thing is in other words, I had to go chase them. They didn't have the courtesy. First, they didn't have the courtesy to include me in the discussion. They didn't have the courtesy to tell me what they were doing. And a year has passed and they haven't had the courtesy to say anything. And it's not just that issue. There were other issues. I wrote them a letter saying that I was willing to spend a considerable amount of money to save one of Prabhupada's farms in North America, but it would be a Krishna West Center. Couldn't even get an answer. So when I get letters, I really try very hard to answer them within 24 hours or at least by the next day. I really try hard to do that because I feel I owe that respect to people that write me.
So this brings up sorry.
Yes. Well, just to conclude, and then I'd be happy to hear from you. I think if we're going to be honest here, I would say many of the GBC are nice people. I think they are, trying to serve Prabhupada sincerely. Some of them, I think, actually, I think have problems of the type of, they have serious problems. But they're not many. I think there's a few who actually, anyway. So, but I think, but ISKCON has a problem. We do not have excellent leadership.
Yeah.
ISKCON does not have inspiring leadership. ISKCON does not have leadership that pays serious attention to the people governing. ISKCON does not have leadership that really feels that we're the servants of the people. And I mean, we just don't have that. I'm not saying they're illegitimate. I'm not saying their private lives are bad people. I know as many of them are very sincere. But as a body, and you can study this because the GBC is an oligarchy. And there's a lot of good social science on the behavior and the problems with oligarchies. And the GBC, as I pointed out in the paper I wrote on this, fits very neatly into the profile of an oligarchy that often cares more about protecting itself than actually helping people. And for example, I know many zones where there's just awful leadership at a GBC level, whether it's just real incompetence where everything sort of falls apart, whether it's a GBC who's a bully and just sort of bullies the people in the zone. And if you're not with him, you get punished, and there's no diversity. There's no question of following Prabhupada's statement that ISKCON is meant to train devotees to be independently thoughtful, not they depend on one person. There are temple presidents where they have what I called in my paper pockets of tyranny within ISKCON, like little banana republic dictatorships. Mm-hmm. And if you ask the simple question, is the GBC actually actively monitoring, let's say, quality control? Are they making sure that the representatives are governing well their zones, that devotees are treated properly, that people have the freedom, the independence that Prabhupada mandated, that people feel respected, people feel heard? No, they do. There is no quality control. So if you're a GBC zonal secretary and you don't flagrantly break the principles or rebel against the GBC or do something really scandalous, then basically you can be pretty much incompetent or a bully for the rest of your life, and no one's ever going to tap you on the shoulder. Mm-hmm. And if you're a temple president, you can be a bully, and you can do all kinds of things, and you can go on for the rest of your life. So we often used to say that ISKCON is a confederation. Bad choice of words, because the American South and the Civil War is a confederation. Yeah, confederation technically in political philosophy means that power resides primarily in the regions, and the regions delegate power to the center.
Right.
So.
Well, that's the reason why I put the temple presidents as one of the temple domes in terms of the highest positions.
Let's see if we can display that, Ananda Lila.
Sure.
Thank you.
So this was just a little drawing I did to try to put together some of my thoughts and, where we're leading to about spiritual abuse. Because abuse also really is fostered within these kind of systems, family systems and hierarchical. We have institutionalized ourselves around an abuse culture. This is what the diagram is. Really, it's showing that the whole society is built on disciples, families, women and children, and it's dependent on the public walking in the doors to the festivals, the preaching programs, the supporting. We are dependent on that public support as a religious organization. So you can see that, generally speaking, of course, there's definitely women who make their way up this system. And I know of at least one woman who gets to be the exception that makes the rule, who's a temple president. But, and maybe there's a couple. But as a whole, you can see that this is clearly a male-dominated system. And I know that people demonize me as a feminist, but let's just say I'm not even talking about equality. I'm talking about partnership in Krishna consciousness. Men are generally told that getting married is Maya, and women are told they must be chaste wives. So there's the equation doesn't add up on a lot of levels here. So the thing is, the problem here is that then the family institute, the family is weakened by this model because the family is attachments and material and mundane, et cetera. And we are really encouraged to be this monastic. I mean, really, sometimes I get the impression that like all the women and children could just walk away and like the celibate men would be happy about that. But this system creates a problem, a lot of problems. One is that as soon as a child is abused, this is actually the fundamental foundation of society, the child. And the rights of the child are so fundamental that this is the easiest measure for us to measure integrity, effectiveness, respect, and devotion. Krishna himself is a child most of the time when we worship him. And so many Vaishnava children, even in the Vedas, look what happened to Jai and Vijay. And Kamsa. Kamsa sent so many child abusers to Vrindavan. And we don't have any hero like Krishna to kill them. So anyway, this is the model that I see. It's incredibly problematic, and it supports the abuse culture that has not been solved. So you can take that down.
I'd like to thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to, as you were speaking, I was thinking that I'd like to introduce sort of a complexity, which I think impacts your analysis, which of course I think you have a lot of history on your side. And could you distract him? It's if you have, for example, nowadays most Hare Krishna temples that I know in big cities, even in the West, where they have deities and all that, they have predominantly an Indian congregation, and they are almost, most of them, strong majority, are either married or going to get married. They have careers, and they're very nice people. They're nice devotees, and they are the financial basis of ISKCON, really. I mean, they are, by their hard work and by their piety, they're maintaining most of the temples. And so I think it's interesting to see how there are these different subcultures within ISKCON, because at that level, a temple president is never going to discourage these professional and fluent congregation members who are supporting the temple, paying to build a new temple. And of course, the Indian families typically very much want their children to go to college, to have a good career. They're often very specific about which career is acceptable for their children. And so you have this, you have this other subculture, which is, of course, the brahmacharis and book distribution, and women are Maya, which is obviously stupid. So I mean, lust is Maya, not women. So there's all these ISKCON today, and I think this impacts also the whole issue of how people should be punished. It is a multicultural society, and what we find is that whether it's the Anglican Church, whether it's the Roman Catholic Church, whether it's ISKCON, every religious society which is truly international, which is not really just like, for example, the Swami Narayan, it's Gujaratis, or the Sikhs are Punjabis. In fact, one sociologist found that in London, the Sikhs, although it originally began as sort of trying to be a universal religion for everyone, but of all the religions that have been studied, it's the one that's most closely identified with a particular ethnic group. So that, for example, among Sikhs in England, the words Sikh and Punjabi are actually synonyms. They mean the same thing. But what I mean to say is, so in these monocultural entities, it's kind of everyone agrees, but when you have truly international multicultural religions, there are often fierce disagreements. So you have on the one hand, Indians who are devotees and sincere devotees and who are paying the bills, everyone's happy with their family life.
Yeah.
But somehow if you're not, and so there's all these different cultures going on simultaneously. And so I think the analysis, it's kind of like we have to look at it from a multicultural perspective. I mean,
I agree, Maharaj, but I think that you're diverting from the point, because this is universally seen by so many people. This pattern is far too common that the women and children are really left out with the shoes. I'm sorry, but that's
no, don't be sorry, because I'm not disagreeing with you. I have to admit here that you probably know more about it than I do. For the simple reason that for many, many years, it's not that I didn't leave ISKCON, but I think I really did exit sort of mainstream temple-centric ISKCON. And I really exited that a long time ago. And I have the very good fortune of being surrounded by wonderful devotees. Like, for example, in Krishna West, at least half the leaders are women, perhaps more. I mean, the head of our legal department, a very nice Vaishnavi created our legal department. There's another Vaishnavi who's actually directing all of our global publications. So actually the most important leaders, in a sense, are women. And in our culture, in our little subculture, from devotees around the world, the kinds of abuses or the kinds of discrimination you mentioned, I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm not, because
they definitely exist a lot.
Yeah, I guess because I think I am really, again, I think you know more than I do about it, because I've been living in a different world and a different culture for many years.
Yes. So that's part of my point, Maharaj, is that when you're in the top layer, like that first chart, you're a Brahmin sannyasi. There's no way for you to know what it's like to be a woman or a child within ISKCON. So I'm telling you that we're left out with the shoes. In case you didn't notice, while you're giving class, that's what's happening.
Although, again, this is good. This is like our old talks.
Yeah.
I would say that I'm not in any way challenging what you're saying. And like I said, I'm sure you know much more about what you're talking about than I do. I'm only adding my humble point, my customary humility, that I exited that, and there are thousands. We're talking about thousands of devotees, not just a few, in different countries, that we see it very, very differently. And so the things you're describing, I don't deny them. I'm not saying you're wrong or you didn't see it properly. I'm just kind of, I don't know, maybe just grateful, because we are offering within ISKCON an alternative where that kind of stuff just really doesn't go on.
Sure. But okay, go ahead. Sorry, Prabhu.
I thought I might just chuck in a question. So we're talking about these different constituent groups that are not necessarily equally represented, don't have an equal voice or even an opportunity. And you were earlier talking about the nature of the dialogue around that. If someone's needs aren't met, quite often they will be in a slightly distorted emotional state, and they might scream out their pain or their needs or whatever. And as we've described, the leaders often aren't listening, so that compounds the challenge. How do you see this culture evolving from here? What needs to happen so that we can even get to a point of having this kind of constructive dialogue that you have called us to, Maharaj?
Well, I think that the GBC, again, I know many of them are very sincere devotees and are really trying their best, but I think the inability of the GBC to provide the kind of leadership ISKCON needs. I'm not saying the GBC is illegitimate. I'm simply saying that I think it's a government which does not perform well, which does not know how to, somehow they're unable to treat devotees even often with common courtesy, myself included. You can't get common courtesy out of these people as a group. They do not. There's no quality control, and so there's a bit of, frankly, despite all the good things they do, a bit of headlessness. And so, I think in terms of, so now, Krishna, KD, get into some, social, some sociology.
Yeah. But I want to make one more important point, and I thank you for bearing with my visuals. Now, in this next one, I drew maybe a relationship that you would be the one to correct. So this one's the 4 regs chart, or 4 regulative principles. And so while they pull that up, what I want to say is that basically, as you know, and my understanding is that the 4 regulative principles are a distillation of the yamas and niyamas. This is like yogic principles of Dharma, correct?
It's there. It just needs Ananda Leela to pull it up.
Oh, okay. So basically, without, there's some of the names of, here it is, some of the yamas and niyamas. And I'm sorry, this is my handwriting. It's a little messy on this small little.
Kind of nice handwriting.
4 regulative principles, we know them: no illicit sex, no meat eating, no gambling, no intoxication. Now you can see below the yamas, the restraints, and the niyamas, observations. So I just drew this relationship that really we can summarize. No illicit sex is the practice of brahmacharya. No eating meat is ahimsa. And no gambling, maybe it was asteya, or also the other possibility was aparigriha. I don't know which one you would say. The non-stealing or non-grabbing, right, is like I would say is the no gambling. And then the no intoxication, I said saucha, the practice of cleanliness. I'm not sure if you would classify these that way, but for the purposes of the conversation, we can say that these are the principles of Dharma. And
right.
Sometimes they show the yamas like a lotus flower with 5 petals that have, a variety of these that includes also satya, and I think that's it. The asteya, no stealing, cleanliness. So that's basically when people summarize the yamas, they'll often add the satya. So that can come down now. Oh, no, not yet. I'm sorry. Please don't. So the point that I wanted to make is that child abuse is not simply breaking brahmacharya. It's breaking brahmacharya. And a lot of times when child abuse is either sexual abuse or enables sexual abuse, then it's also, I consider that ahimsa. And it's not just brahmacharya, there's ahimsa, brahmacharya, the gambling, asteya, no grabbing, okay? Like just even literally, no grabbing. And then no intoxication or cleanliness. How can you do all it, abuse a child and call yourself clean? So I argue that child abuse breaks all 4 regulative principles. This is my argument, Maharaj.
Very interesting. Very thoughtful. I'll throw out a few things.
Okay.
It's hard to get me to talk.
Yeah, no, that's why we're doing this. Why we're doing it.
Yeah, I was just actually joking in my mind. So, first of all, just one. I don't know. You probably already know this, but actually, no illicit sex, Prabhupada often defined as no sex outside of marriage.
Sure.
And I sent to the GBC a long list of quotes, and because they were saying it's only sex in marriage for procreation, which is of course a very high standard for very advanced people. But for devotees in general and people in general, illicit sex means sex outside of marriage. And I sent all the evidence, but they've never adjusted that.
I think that the Ministry of Family or whatever does give that recommendation.
Okay, good. Very good. Thank you. Mm-hmm. I would say that child abuse I'm tempted to say that it not only breaks the principles of yoga, that it's actually what would almost be called asura dharma, that it's demonic. And it's because, like, let's say someone gambles or something, like Yudhishthira gambled, or someone, whatever, sometimes people can't control their urges or something. But child abuse, I think it's actually even in a lower category. It's like asura. It's asura behavior.
So it's incredibly powerful. It's also, I would say, I don't know if you have a word for like a negative samskara. This is an incredibly deep cut in the psyche and the karmic imprint.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a Sanskrit word like for trauma.
Yeah.
Something like that. And
but I use that word samskara because it's marked us.
Oh, sanskara is not necessarily good. I mean, there's actually two different uses of the word sanskara. I mean, one meaning is like the rites of passage, what they call the rites of passage, like ceremonies when you're about to, like, literally garbhadana, like placing the seed in the, or birth itself, or, you know, cutting the hair and marriage and just all the, you know, so that those are sanskaras. But the other sense of sanskara in the yoga tradition just means a very deep impression. In fact, there's a famous scholar at the University of Chicago, Eliade, who is very famous in the 20th century, who said that India, through the yoga system, became the first culture to actually discover deep psychology. And so a sanskara in that sense may be a bad impression. It's just a deep impression, which can be positive or negative.
Yes, exactly. So that's why I call that trauma a samskara, because I feel like it's something that maybe people will understand, like the depth and the lifelong imprint, right? That's one of the things, like the marriage ceremony. We do these samskaras so that they imprint for our entire duration. So that's the karmic impact of abuse.
One of the sorry,
no,
one of the debate points that's come up quite a bit is this apichetsu durachara, which you also quoted in your essay. Some are arguing, look, you know, a person's been punished enough, they've reformed themselves. Krishna says there's still a sadhu. Others are saying it's not even about punishment. It's not good or eva samantavya, that you then become a guru. And there's also the consideration of the external community. They're also mentioned on KD's temple diagram. Maybe people look at these things in different ways. It's durachar, but is it beyond that? You've called it asuric. Well, even if we're not talking about punishment. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, Krishna says sudurachar, very bad behavior. So Ananda Leela actually just sent me an article, I think this morning, where we find now that 85%, that's almost everybody, 85% of Protestant ministers across all the denominations, 85% of Protestant ministers voted that a minister, someone who's in ministry, who has sexually abused anyone, I mean, especially a minor, obviously, but especially a minor, should never again in this life be admitted into ministry.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, whatever one's opinion may be about apichetsu durachara, for those of us who live and try to serve, certainly in the Western world, if someone has committed sexual abuse,
it doesn't have to be sexual abuse. There's lots of ways.
Okay. Although I guess that's an interesting discussion, by the way. I mean, that itself is
I can say for a fact that every kind of abuse, like physical, sexual, emotional, all involves psychological abuse.
And damage, psychological damage.
So
Okay, I agree with you. I happily agree with you that, let's say, because it's not like, it's not like a pure science like mathematics or something, but I would say that any type of abuse which rises to, or maybe goes down, which reaches a certain depth of damage.
How about just professional standards?
What's that?
Professional standards, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, I do think that in
That's
general
fine.
we do need to be more centered on the survivors, but there's just basic level of professional standard.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I would definitely defer to professionals. And even though I'm a guru and therefore a know-it-all, or I know it all, but it's but yeah, I would definitely defer. I mean, to me, that's a matter for science, just like gender intelligence to me is a matter for reputable science. And so if we learn from competent professionals that a type of behavior causes severe trauma and something which, then of course, then I agree with you, then that's, so abuse is not only sex abuse.
So then this is where I wanted to kind of look at that, how that translates into our experience with ISKCON has been that the philosophy has been wielded as a tool of psychological abuse.
As a
tool or a weapon of psychological abuse.
Yeah, by many people. I think that when they say power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. I actually know some GBC members were kind of beleaguered and exhausted and just, trying to get up in the morning and do something. And I know others who I would say have tendencies toward narcissism and who mistreat and bully people who they imagine are under their power. I think I would say most of them, I think, are sincere, doing their best, whatever their best looks like. But I agree with you. I mean, I basically agree. To me, I thoroughly endorse and really want a sort of free ISKCON from this pervasive amateurism on so many levels.
Yes. So what has happened is, over time, is that the institution has hardened around some of this misapplication of philosophy. It's actually abusive institutionally. If you look at as a pattern, especially because I'm looking at it as an adult child, but it seems to me that there's the higher up you get in that temple diagram, the more you have the privilege and possibility of abusing with impunity, adults and children. But there's several people who've committed child abuse while wearing sannyas vesh, who continue to wear sannyas vesh. And it completely deteriorates the public trust in that ashram. There cannot be, now that there's just like multiple sannyasis who this has happened to, you can say, oh, this will attract predators. Because I've also seen book distributors, if you're a big book distributor, big kirtan leader for Sunday Feast, they have a harder time, going through the process. ISKCON protects child abusers. It, as a whole, this Gita verse is one of the first ones whipped out. We should forgive. This is a heavy, heavy rhetoric of forgiveness, which I don't agree with. I think this is, I've actually seen forgiveness listed as one of the pillars of bhakti, where I've never heard any of our 6 Goswamis speaking about forgiveness as a pillar of bhakti. Of course, kindness and all of these qualities.
Well, forgiveness. I mean, Krishna does mention, he doesn't say pillar. It's not like in a very small.
I think that's a made-up thing.
Yeah, it's not in a small elite list.
It was an Instagram.
Yeah, because Shema Shamamis for. I think that again, what I really want is a professionalization. ISKCON has a pervasive amateurism, whether it's in the total inability to do marketing to find out whether people can actually understand our books or what books they can understand, sort of this total indifference to that, or whether it's lacking I would like to see a body, and maybe we shouldn't get into it now, my opinion about the ICPO, because I really did my homework on this one. And I know.
Okay, well, let's hear it then. Let's hear your homework. I want to know.
Okay, I'll just finish that sentence and I'll jump in and then ruin all the goodwill I've created. But I would like to see ISKCON, how should I put it, institute a highly professional body of experts in the fields of psychology, neurology, and obviously with specializations in child abuse and all that. And I would like to see decisions made on the grounds of science, not on people's feelings. But we know that, and I agree with you. I agree with you that Prabhupada said, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. Prabhupada always taught this, that if we're going to have the audacity to present ourselves to the public as a higher culture, a spiritual culture, we have to set a higher standard, not a lower standard.
Yes.
And so here, for example, you have 85% of Protestant ministers taking their stand. So as far as I don't know, I don't want to be mean-spirited, but there was one particular case that I investigated, not the guilt or innocence of the accused, because I kept saying over and over again, I don't know. I'm not God. I don't know. I haven't investigated, but I do know very clearly what fair process is. I know what witness tampering is.
Okay, so let's stop you there before you ruin your goodwill with the Guru Coolies. Let's just first, to finish off all of that leading up, I wrote all the charts to kind of walk us down this path. And what I would really like to, we've talked about acknowledging these offenses on a professional level and on a public trust level. On a philosophical level, as it's been stated elsewhere, would you agree that child abuse within ISKCON is Vaisnava aparad?
Is
Vaisnava aparad.
Oh, it's major Vaisnava aparad.
Yeah.
Oh,
so that's a very important distinction, because it actually emphasizes the rights of a child. The UN rights of the child. You can look that up sometime. If we're not acknowledged in ISKCON, or not we, I say that as the collective children, but if children aren't acknowledged as Vaishnavas, then they lose their human rights within ISKCON.
Yeah.
Because the sannyasi or whoever any adult is considered a Vaishnava. And then we're supposed to forgive, and we're supposed to allow them to have mistakes and fall downs. But this is also really important to make a distinction that child abuse is not a fall down. It's not an accident. To cross a line with a child cannot be called an accident. It's just, it lacks all responsibility, and it victim.
Well, I would say
it blames the victim for their own trauma.
Oh, no. I mean, blaming the victim is obviously would be absurd. But for example, I think I would like to use an additional category here.
Okay.
In terms of sociology and psychology. Yeah. That is, let's say, for example, a man in a moment of just extreme anger and madness kills another person. That crime, the fact that you could say, momentary insanity, you could say the person's overcome by rage, it's still murder. And that person still will be convicted and punished as a murderer. So it gets into the issue. Okay, here we get into our real ballpark here. I think what we're really looking at, again, my desire to be sort of, rigorous here. It gets into an issue of psychological determinism. And I'm not bringing up this category to say, okay, let this person off, or this person should not be punished, or, you know, just forget about it. No, I'm not saying that. I'm in no way using this category of human psychology to justify or to excuse.
Okay, I think I understand where you're going with this. That as victims and survivors, we have to also choose survival, right? We have to choose the higher.
No, absolutely. But I was actually thinking also of, for example, I mean, obviously to commit child abuse, especially for one who's in a high position, is you know, it's an unspeakable, horrible thing. And the word unspeakable is actually Sanskrit. They say avadya, unspeakable, to mean something which is really bad.
Yeah.
And so, like even saying criminal prosecution, according, you know, to the normal way that civilized countries adjudicate crimes, that someone, you know, there's a premeditation,
Right.
and then there's sort of a spontaneous, like you went crazy and you did something really bad. You're going to be punished for it. You are guilty. You're not exonerated. You're not innocent. If you're not, let's say, like a, you know, it's a complete lunatic, or a complete mad person that, you know, society should have incarcerated or locked up this person. So, yeah, but there is a legal distinction, and these distinctions sometimes come down for, you know, for 1,000 years, and they're based on, you know, millions of cases. And so I think it'd be a mistake to just sort of to not pay attention to certain old legal traditions between premeditation and.
Okay, so that's we're talking about intent, right? We're talking about intent.
Or yeah, premeditation. The difference between premeditation
and intent. Or premeditation. People will say, like, I didn't mean to hurt you, and so intent is one thing, and premeditation.
Well, but if you say,
let me respond though. Okay. It's important because your perspective is really still focused on the perpetrator. So in general, the conversation needs to center on the survivor, and there's a few things that are necessary to heal, whether it's premeditated or not, may or may not, you know, impact. I'm getting an echo. So I know that for abuse survivors, one of the most important things is to be witnessed. And now the witness is actually, as you know, because we have the witness in our heart, a very, very special piece of healing. There needs to be one person who is an adult figure or a leader to acknowledge, yes, this happened.
Of course.
When that doesn't happen, when there's no acknowledgement, then abuse survivors self-direct that pain,
right,
or direct it to the world. So we can say that this piece of grace from Super Soul is an incredibly important piece of healing. So before we start talking about any of the intent of the perpetrator, we have to understand, have we heard and acknowledged the victim?
Yeah, of course.
Number one. Secondly, it continues to perpetuate the harm when we see a person who has made a violation or an offense that egregious, asura dharma, and they're continuing to be elevated on the Vyasasan or in the sannyas vesh and being garlanded. People, there's no fine print to sannyas, right? Nobody says, but he's not an official ISKCON guru. He's only allowed to just come take darshan, but he won't give class. But his disciples are all around paying obeisances to him. But still, he is a child abuser and he's not giving class. So there you go.
So let's allow Maharaj to respond.
Yeah, but so the point is that when we see abusers in positions of public trust and power, it continues to harm the victim.
Okay, valid point. First of all, you want to do what I do best, defend myself. So,
Okay.
so I don't think I said anything which, in my mind, shows that my first focus is on the perpetrator or trying to mitigate the offense as opposed to the victim.
Okay.
I believe that in a civilized justice system, and I think it's very telling that the GBC, despite urgent calls for it for decades, is unable to establish a justice ministry in ISKCON. I mean, that speaks for itself. So I only mention thing of premeditation because there you can be totally sympathetic to the victim, but you can actually, there's a line between, let's say, a serious a justice system which does give first concern to the victim, and vigilantism. And so I want ISKCON to be a civilized society. Civilized to me doesn't mean let perpetrators go free and ignore the victims. That's not all what I mean. I believe that every aspect of a justice system has to be professional, it has to be intelligent, and it has to make relevant distinctions. To me, it's not a relevant distinction to say that a perpetrator, should not be seriously punished. That's not a relevant distinction. As far as the, I think you made a lot of good points. In my private life, not my public life, I actually, now I can say something really shocking. No, but in my private life, I actually do help a lot of guru coolies. I don't talk about it because my first duty is to protect their privacy, not to, toot my horn, which includes spending a lot of money to put a lot of them through college. And so, in sort of in a discreet way, I do really care very much about it. And it's a little thing. I mean, obviously, other people are doing much more. So I agree with everything you said, really. And talking to you is really helps me. And that's why I want to talk to you, not to win a debate,
Yeah.
pleasing as that is, but because I really respect your
all day, because I'm not going to let you win, Maharaj.
I'm happy to hear that.
We're going to have a good conversation and find agreement.
Yeah. No, but I've always respected your intelligence, and I've always respected your integrity, and I welcome this opportunity for this discussion, among other things, because I know that by talking to you, I'm going to learn, and so I appreciate that, and you're speaking with great feeling and authenticity, and it's very good for me to hear that.
Yeah.
Maharaj, a few minutes.
Sorry, go ahead.
A few minutes ago, you were talking about concerns with due process and ICPO. I think you're about to describe some of the things you'd like to see going forward, or things that historically you've been less than convinced.
My concern, I believe, I don't want to see ISKCON descend into what I would describe from what I saw, and I really did investigate this very carefully, vigilantism. In any civilized society, in fair process, there must be three elements. There must be a prosecution, there must be the defense, and there must be a judge. And when the prosecution also becomes the judge, that's not a justice system. When the person managing the proceeding declares that this person would rather see any number, I mean, including a very large number of innocent people punished, that is better than letting one guilty person go free. And in terms of abuse, I mean, I think like a simple, basic definition of abuse would be causing significant harm to an innocent person. And so for someone to say, I prefer that any number of people, innocent people, be abusively punished, to me, that's better than one guilty person going free when there's egregious
Do we have a history of prosecuting like innocent people for abuse?
What I'm talking about here is process, and any civilized society that is not just a vigilante mob or warlord.
Okay, so I take exception to this vigilante mob because I have been advocating for child protection, and so
I'm not accusing. I'm not a. Oh, let me just clarify. I am not saying that this or that group is a vigilante mob. I'm just putting out.
But I have been called. I've been called mob justice before.
Not by me.
But it doesn't matter. We're talking about the concept, right?
Okay, so, but if I could just
let Maharaj finish.
Yeah, like the good old days.
Yeah,
KD,
you know.
Yeah, KD was always great to talk to. So, in other words, it's precisely in those situations where we are most justifiably disturbed, concerned, where we see real evil before us. I mean, it's precisely in those situations where civilization is tested, in situations where we justifiably have perhaps our strongest feelings. Can we still maintain fair process? In the case that I got involved in, I kept saying over and over again, I couldn't have said it more. There's no way as a human being I could say it more clearly or more often, that I am not claiming that this person is innocent. I'm not claiming this person is innocent. I'm simply saying there are universal, international standards of fair process. And if those standards are met, whatever the verdict, if this person is found guilty, I will accept it without protest. I will simply submit to the decision of a fair process. That's all I said. And for that, I was accused of being an abuser. I was accused of actually trying to facilitate child abuse because I simply said that I know this wasn't fair. I mean, I studied it very carefully. I went into the bylaws of the ICPO. I showed actually problems even at the level of bylaws, which did not meet universal standards of fair process. And there was all kinds of. I mean, there's a list of like principles of fair process, and they were almost all violated. I was just calling for a fair trial, and I said, whatever the decision, I'll accept it. That's all I said. And for that, I was, I got hate mail. I was, people, telling me, I used to respect you, but you're this and you're that, just because I said, I want to live in a society where the universal standards of fair process are followed. That's all I said.
Did you know that I get death threats for advocating for child protection?
I have received death threats. I have to ask Brahmacharya because he I don't remember.
Well, no, I have, Maharaj. I'm telling you, I have.
Well, whoever made the death threat I would say, is an asura in Vaishnava dress.
Right. So I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that the system isn't modeled after a justice system that you would like to see within ISKCON. I would like to just respond by saying that there is absolutely no due process for victims. That whatever prosecution you're talking about is also not an advocate for victims. Victims themselves have no advocacy. I could do this for a full-time job.
You should do it. I mean, ISKCON should.
Well, are you going to pay me?
What's that? I'll put in my nickel. No, really. I think that what I see happening here between us, in addition to a happy reunion, is that I think you are eloquently and powerfully making extremely important points. And I think ISKCON cannot succeed, it can't flourish unless it really pays attention to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And I am making some other points, which some people interpret as, I don't care about the victims.
Okay, so I can explain it to you. I understand why you're feeling defensive. I get it. So here's why, okay? Here's why, is that there's practically most abusers are protected by the institution already, especially if they have any position and if they have friends in the GBC. The GBC will always meddle and devalue the work of child protection continuously and consistently, unless it's to cover their reputation. So, although I understand your considerations about due process, I think that the reason is that that you were making those points not in a general sense, but it was in relation to a particular case. And that intervention on the case was not welcome, just like any other GBC or sannyasi should stay away.
But actually, no. Let me say this: if, let's say, any entity, it could be the ICPO or some other regional CPO, if they follow international standards of civilized societies for justice, if they follow that, then I agree that let them do their job.
Okay, so I think that I don't know that there's a disagreement. What I would suggest is that those things are contributed to the ICPO when it's not riding on a case, a high-profile case of consequence. I think it's we all want to see the same thing.
We do, absolutely.
So if we can strengthen the judicial process and also create more resources for victims and survivors, we need to just make sure that there's been there's just been so much protection for abusers. And we'll forgive them. There's so many ways that the abuse is enabled, but through philosophy.
Yeah, and that I'm sure. I'm not talking about that at all. And I hope you understand that I am your fan and supporter in this. And I believe in what you're doing. I think it's a noble cause. I'm only saying that it's often been said by many wise people, even if they didn't belong to the Hare Krishna movement, that that the real test of a society is that in difficult situations, like we talk about professionalism. I mean, clearly, the head of the ICPO must have professional credentials. That's not the case now.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Masters. They both have master's degrees.
Yes.
In
child protection.
In child protection.
Okay, perhaps I got the wrong information. I will correct myself. I'll verify that.
But, and the processes have been certified by experts in the field as being top class. Yeah. Notwithstanding the concerns you have, we were wondering what.
I again, you have to forgive me, but I would really, because I received very different information. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that because I received very different information from people who definitely don't, are not trying to protect child abuse. I would definitely want to verify some of that, because at the time I made my comment several years ago, it was not the case. And in the particular case that I was involved in, there's no reputable body that could know what I knew, or that could be presented with the information I found and say it was first class. It's just impossible. I know enough about law and justice and fair process. It's impossible. But
we'll see if we can involve them on the thread to respond. Obviously, it's the middle of the night in the UK right now.
Yeah. Actually, what I would like to do is, so that I don't make false claims, to investigate it further, because, and so I would like to, investigate more and find out. And if as far as the fair process, I received a lot of evidence which proves my point. But in any case, I just want to say to Krishna Devata that, I really do appreciate you, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I think that, you've certainly helped me. You have a very strong voice. You have, to me, unquestioned integrity. And so I'm grateful that you've taken the time to to express yourself. And I don't think I'm part of the problem. And I also agree with you. I mean, we have a serious problem. I think it's possible to be respectful to the GBC in the way that we should be respectful in general to Vaishnavas, and at the same time recognize that our society has a major leadership problem. It's a serious leadership problem, and it pops up everywhere. It's like if there's some problem, disease in your body, all kinds of symptoms arise. And of course, this is one of the most tragic symptoms, perhaps, not really policing the schools and so on. But we do have
not just schools, though. It's really important that we think that the problem is not solved because our schools are closed. It's incredibly important because that culture of abuse is still present. That hasn't been adjusted. And nor is there a place to have any representation or respectful dialogue. This is very unique, and I always appreciate this opportunity, Maharaj, but this is not something that I get to do. And truthfully, I last year, I approached the GBC regarding Damodara because he was applying to re-enter ISKCON as a guru, even though that was the whole reason he was not an official guru. He's never been kicked out. He was just told because he's beaten so many kids, he can't be a guru. So now he's just been a guru somewhere else while his disciples flourish and marginalize his victims. He still comes in sannyas vesh. Anyway, he's an example of even where the CPO made a ruling and it's not followed by many GBC and sannyasis and gurus, and they enable him. And they enable this. So here's the problem. Somebody like Damodara. Do you know how many millennial Gurukulis, second generation, pay their obeisances to him? It's incredibly painful to know that our brothers, like several brothers, took their lives from the pain and suffering from being beaten. Like, I could tell you stories, Maharaj. Like, I've heard from these men themselves what their experiences were. Maharaj had I shouldn't call him Maharaj. I don't want to call him Maharaj, okay? Damodara had a signature slap of boxing kids by their ears, really hard, slamming both their ears. And several men, have permanent ear damage. Permanent damage to their eardrums from this boxing of the head. This was common. Every day, his method of walking through the Gurukula and deciding who's going to get whacked today. The element of surprise is intense psychological abuse. Now, just let me put it to you this way. Can you imagine if there was an ISKCON Swami who was using the same methodology with cows in the Holy Dham?
Good point.
They would have lost their life.
They
would have lost their life. They would have lost their life in India. But here we waffle. Oh, it was so long ago. Damodara will never be forgiven in this lifetime because his victims took their life. He has suicided victims, and so he takes that burden. So my point is, though, that when I went after this, he's preaching, just like you have Krishna West, he's preaching all over America. His top disciple is going to a music festival next week. He's one of the top, prominent podcasters, yoga asana teachers, and celebrity devotees as a Damodara disciple. And so the message is that, he's accepted. So on the other hand, while I watch him bring all of these yoga people and tourists new people and millennial second generation into the Holy Dham following a sannyasi who has performed Asura Dharma repeatedly for many years, okay? And not just like one or two, like hundreds of children were slammed by this man. So then I was, once the story of Damodara, I just want to make this point. I was the one called a vigilante. I was the one called mob justice. Because when I go to the GBC, I'm just a little girl, Maharaj. They just see me as a little girl. And I started a petition. And we approached the GBC with 3,000 names. Because that's the only way that I'll be heard. Otherwise, I'm out with the shoes, Maharaj. I'm out with the shoes. There's no place for me to be heard. And there's no means to advocate for our children and our victims, our brothers and sisters. So
I just want to clarify that I was using the word vigilante in a different way. I mean,
well, I am. I'll ride, Maharaj. I will.
No. What you were doing, I see you as an activist. That's very different than what I meant by vigilante.
Okay. Well,
could you elaborate a little on that distinction?
Yeah. Vigilante means that, I mean, in the case of the person you mentioned,
yes.
There are proven offenses. Mm-hmm. Offenses, some of them very grave. I mean, most grave. Yeah. And so therefore, vigilante means, in the sense I'm using it, that you skip the judicial process, and it's like frontier justice, just hanging from the highest tree, and you bypass. But in the case of Damodara Swami, he did go through a judicial process, and therefore the statements that KD is making, she's not bypassing. The judicial process actually took place. And so what she's demanding is justice. She's demanding that based on proven allegations, that proper measures should be taken. That's not vigilantism. That's, she's fighting for justice. Okay. She understands it.
So, Mark, the problem though with the case that you were involved in though is that if you fight too heavily for fair process without fighting for the voice of the victim, and still fight too heavily to make sure that justice is served to perpetrators, that's why you ended up on that side of the argument.
Okay, you're probably right. At the same time, there is a large body of people who chant Hare Krishna in their different ways, who are seriously irrational. It's one thing, I mean, a lot. So it's, for example, I'm talking to you, and what you said to me just now, I'm thinking that's good advice. Because you're a lady, you're a Vaishnavi, you're an intelligent person, and you are telling me what you think. And so I think I'm grateful to hear it. I've always respected you. And I'm thinking, yeah, she's probably right. And I the same thing you said, actually, I've heard from my own disciples. Of course, I never forgive them for correcting me. But anyway, but I think, I mean, so that's one.
You forgive me, Maharaj.
So it's one thing to give someone good advice, which I think you did. It's another thing to publicly declare that because that you're evil and you're a horrible person and you're this and that, and that's different. So I'm always, I hope that I'm not so lost.
Well, people are punching up, Maharaj. I think you have to be a little like, you're a symbol. When you're wearing saffron, you become a symbol.
As in symbol/target.
Yeah. Hey, we all have our turns. I'm a target, really. I also am a target, Maharaj. So
I know.
That's the responsibility of being a leader. You have to take it. I'm sorry.
No, I know that, but you are. I mean, for me, you're not a target, and I'm sure I'm not a target for you. You know, you're a friend who's giving advice, which I'm listening to carefully. So, what I want to do is there's something about the democratization of reality, or in other words, I think it's very dangerous in society. And we've seen that play out in having an extremely dangerous sociopath in the White House, you know, a little while ago.
Right.
I mean, someone who I thought was an existential threat to civilization based on my knowledge of history.
Yeah.
So at the present time, and I won't go into, I mean, I could, I like this. I could talk for hours about the last few centuries of history, but I'll spare you that. I won't punish you with that. So
another time,
yes. But I think it's very important that we have, and this is really gets to Damodara. I mean, this is the point you made in the opening. Oh, let me give you one little anecdote quickly. When I went to Harvard, and when I registered, that was like the old-fashioned way. They had tables set up, and you go there and show your ID, and they give you a welcome package, like this envelope. So, in addition to one free ticket to a Harvard football game, I was kind of looking through it, and they had this little like announcement or this little pamphlet, I would say, and they were explaining and justifying why Harvard, as a free speech community, and sort of defined itself as a free speech community, why Harvard does not allow certain kinds of speech, such as hate speech. And the argument they gave was because there are certain kinds of speech which destroy free speech, because they create sort of this mob rule, as we saw with this, sociopath who was in the White House.
Right.
And so therefore, I think it's very important that you and myself, Damodar, and other people who feel strongly and obviously coming from different experiences, but at the same time, we talk to each other. I mean, I remember when I was young, when I was in high school, and we were really kind of politically active. I belonged to the Young Democrats. I didn't know why I just did, because everyone else belonged to them. And I remember in those days, there would be debates. Like, for example, James Baldwin, a leading African-American civil rights. He was like one of the leading intellectuals of the whole civil rights movement, famous author. And then you had William Buckley, who was one of the leading conservatives. And they had these debates. They had a debate at the Oxford Union in Oxford University. And what was very interesting is that they were both learned, they were both articulate, and they respected each other. They disagreed strongly, but they were gentlemen.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a certain culture which makes possible reasonable discussion, debate, which makes possible for you, for example, to convince me of certain points, which I think you have. And so, but in order to have that kind of Brahminical dialogue, we can't hate each other. We can't, call each other malicious names. And so that culture doesn't favor one side or the other. It doesn't predispose the discussion or the debate. It allows us to have a discussion.
Yes. Yes.
That's my only point. That was really the only point in my paper.
So I think, just back to the original living room talks that we had, was always that we needed a venue. So like there's so many things broken with ISKCON, I think, but two things that I think are like absolutely critical for the healing of ISKCON and the growth of ISKCON in the future is one, child protection is just like when there's divorced parents. They say if you put the welfare of the children at the top, then it'll keep you in alignment. Even if you disagree on everything, if you can like put that as number one, then you can create harmony. So as far as I'm concerned, the Child Protection Office, with maybe your support and advice about how they can improve. This is a like critical and foundational level of accountability. Because
I agree.
From top to bottom.
I agree. And one thing I wanted to point out is that one of the key distinctions between first world countries and third world countries, and there are various distinctions, but one of them is that typically in third world countries, NGOs are not very strong. It's kind of like warlords and tyrants and corrupt governments. Whereas in first world countries, and there are institutes, academic institutes that measure levels of governmental transparency and justice system. Usually Scandinavia scores very high. So I think that ISKCON, in order not to be a sort of a third world mango republic or something, I think it's really, I think it's a mistake strategically to think that everybody has to wait around for an often ineffective GBC to become effective. I believe that what ISKCON really needs is people like you, and to really form powerful NGOs that really sway public opinion. For example, when I started Krishna West, there were some leaders in the movement who were just absolutely determined to destroy it. And there was all kind. I mean, someday when you have more time, I'll bore you with all the stories. But there was an incredible amount of, I would say, abusive injustice. And so what I did is I took my case to the people. And one thing I learned from Amarendra about appeal courts, the strategy for persuading an appeal court, a panel of judges, is completely different from a jury trial. Because in a jury trial, often the people aren't very bright because the lawyers usually kind of, disqualify people who actually think because they want to manipulate the jury. Yeah. But when you get to a panel of learned appeal judges, if you start, doing your histrionics and you're shouting and banging your fist and emotional appeal, they'll crush you because they take it as an insult to their intelligence. And so when you're doing an appeal before a panel of judges, you're calm and you make your case. And I decided that's what I was going to do in a calm way without offending anyone by name. I was going to make my case to the devotees of ISKCON. And I did. And I think that I got so much sympathy. One GBC person said that since they did one of their really outrageous things they did with me, one GBC admitted that it looks like your support has tripled. And so basically, so I think I really see you as an important leader. And I think it is possible to create powerful NGOs that don't try to subvert Prabhupada's system. But I think the GBC can only function properly because what we see now is a totally top-down model with, very little lateral movement. Mm-hmm. And it's very interesting. When I was doing research on the GBC, I was writing a paper, which I did, a 60-page paper on the lack of justice in ISKCON, which I can send you. And because the GBC in their own rhetoric, they would always say sannyasis are under the GBC and the devotees are under the. And then I looked in the whole database, and Prabhupada never used that language. Yeah. And so I believe that the GBCs, without powerful NGOs who are loyal and reasonable, but really, crusade for what they believe in. I don't know if we're still allowed to use that word, crusade. But anyway, really fight for what.
Art style.
I mean, really fight for what they believe in, not as renegades, not as, sort of branded as disloyal or something, but as leaders, as public leaders, civic leaders, as intelligent, determined people. And I think without powerful NGOs in ISKCON, I don't think we can get an effective GBC because I think governments left to their own devices will inevitably drift into inefficiency, corruption, all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage you that I think we really need in ISKCON, how do we solve the problem of a GBC which is largely unable to do quality control of its own members? And there seems to be something which I guess the heavy word would be cronyism. they may interpret as just, compassion for their old friends or something. You could call it cronyism. And so I don't think we can have a good GBC if we don't have NGOs and ISKCON. That's my analysis.
Right. So that's a great suggestion. The other thing I was going to say is just there does need to be some way to address the GBC that doesn't take a crusade.
There is a way. There is a way, because and the way is, frankly, you have to build up popular support. The GBC, if they see that you, as they saw, frankly, in my case, that Krishna West at a certain point became inoperable, in the ISKCON body, because it was so. When you get support, you're an articulate, intelligent person with great integrity, and I think that if rather than just like, I think in a sense the problem is that people like you. Wow, people like you. I think one of the problems is kind of. I think one of the problems is for you or me to think that, what can we do? The GBC will never get it. I think when the GBC see, when they understand that a lot of people are persuaded by your arguments, a lot of people are behind you, they will do what they need to do in order to keep peace in ISKCON, in order to keep things, proper.
We do need to crusade then.
What's that?
I said then we do need to crusade.
Yeah, they will have to negotiate with you. They will have to deal with you.
What if they're not what if there's just somebody I've trailblazed a place for myself to have a voice, but a lot of people don't have that spirit. And to me, just as a concept, I like the idea of having NGOs affiliated, but to exactly remedy the authoritarian top-down, there needs to be some, representation of the people, so to speak, right? What do they say? This one? Here's the church, and here's the steeple, and here's all the people. So
what a mudra.
So I'm mindful that we're about 1 hour 45 minutes in, and it must be getting particularly late where you guys are. It's okay for me.
Well, I'm just so happy to have this.
Let's talk to everybody.
Happy to have this reunion with my old friend.
Yeah, sorry for socializing.
You've been extraordinarily generous, both of you, and speaking with great force and clarity and so on. I'm thinking, though, that maybe it's time that we think about some concluding statements from each of you, and then we'll also cherry pick possibly from the comments section. But I don't want to presume too much on both of your time. At 1 hour 45 minutes, how long is reasonable to continue?
I'm really fine. I just consider it of our audience, and I would like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people they always have the leave button, so. Yeah. I'm very happy that I'm having this conversation with Krishna Devata, and I'm an optimist. I was raised in California, can do, but I believe in ISKCON, not because I think the leadership at this point is particularly brilliant, but because I think that if we are sincere and we are devoted, that Krishna will somehow empower us and help us. And so I mean, like, the fact that Krishna Devata and I, coming from different directions, we obviously share a lot of concerns, and we have, I mean, some things I care about more maybe than she has thought about them, and obviously she has concerns as a mother, as a Guru Kuli, or as the wonderful way of talking ISKCON as a female-bodied devotee. And so, I mean, obviously she is going to have concerns because of her life experience, and we have, and so I think the fact that we can work together, we can talk, and the disagreement is actually, I think, it's enriching, because Krishna Devata is bringing a perspective which is powerful, which is intelligent, which is extremely important, and I don't have her life experience, but I can learn from it. And I've had other experiences. So that's why civility is so important, because it allows us to enrich each other by bringing experiences that the other may not have had, but would still, for example, I was brought to the brink of, I thought I was going to, I've been brought to the brink, let me put it this way, in my service to ISKCON, where I feel I had to make certain very strong decisions, just literally to save my sanity and to save my spiritual life. I mean, I was, by certain things that happened in ISKCON, by certain ways that I was treated, I was brought to the brink. And so I did what I had to do. And I mean, Krishna Devata, didn't have those experiences, but she had others that I didn't have, which were equally powerful and equally important. And so, we can be nice, we can really work together. And I think I really firmly, I'm like someone, I'm a child of the rational enlightenment. I really believe that people with goodwill and good intentions who listen to each other and respect each other can come to a, not exactly maybe the same thing, but to sufficient agreement and sufficient mutual understanding to work together effectively to make ISKCON more of what it's supposed to be.
Thank you. Any final thoughts from you, KD?
Sure. I just wanted to address, the idea that, like, I'm not part of ISKCON, because I do talk about leaving. I've left ISKCON. I don't even know what that means anymore, because, like I told you recently, I gave up my ISKCON seva, so that's significant. But, like, me being frustrated with ISKCON and saying, like, I'm done with it, they don't know that they're losing me. They don't have any clue, right? Like, and I've even heard recently, like, people talking about, like, dismissing me, like, oh, she's not part of ISKCON. So I just, for you and many others to know that I can, like, say that I'm leaving ISKCON, and even ISKCON can tell me that I'm not part of ISKCON. But I was raised on Krishna Prasad. I was raised in the temples of ISKCON, and ISKCON will forever be part of my life story. So if I write a tell-all, they'll definitely be in my book, even if I'm not in theirs. Okay, so I just want, one of the reasons I bring that up, and I think this is an important point also, just my last point. When I was studying, one of the things that we looked at in terms of that sociology perspective is that a group isn't just the group. Everybody who's left the group is also telling of the group. Every person who's ever left ISKCON is actually part of ISKCON. And when we think about that broad picture of all of the people who've been harmed or discarded in their story with ISKCON, that it's a much broader and more accurate picture. And that if we just look at the institution and look through the windows, like, and just look at what's going on in the temple, that's not ISKCON. And you know that, obviously, but it's important for other people. So I say that for other people, that ISKCON, no matter what I say, I've left ISKCON out of frustration. Of course, like, I love Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada loves me. That I know. And I also know that Krishna has witnessed every one of us. So that's how I'm part of ISKCON, and that's my final word.
Massive thank you to you both for passionately engaging, and I don't mean Rajagoon here, but to full-blooded participation in such an important topic. And I hope it has been helpful food for thought for anyone that was dialing in. Especially grateful for the generosity of time and even spirit. Perhaps we departed from time to time. I said I was going to be unobtrusive. I was probably way more unobtrusive than I should have been.
It was perfect, probably.
I'm going to cherry pick just a few comments with a view of making sure that we've done justice to those. Some of them I might turn into question. one of the challenges with, let's say, a crusade to have the GBC adjudicate current cases and so on is that there's a load of disciples who are now possibly for the first time hearing things about their guru's past. And many of them will feel morally obligated to defend their guru's honor, and they'll go to various extremes in doing so. Do you have any advice, Maharaj, if someone hears accusations, how do they balance the feeling heard and witnessing with defending their guru's honor, and how exactly do we resolve all of those things?
Well, I'm glad I got a simple question. I would say that it's I do feel compassion for disciples like that. Let's say there's a disciple who on the one hand only has good experience. Let's say a disciple feels, you saved me from material life. You brought me to Krishna, and therefore, I'll always be grateful. On the other hand, there's their past activities which are, horrendous. And so, I feel compassion for those people, because those followers, they haven't abused anyone. And Krishna Devata?
No, I'm just thinking, okay.
It's difficult. There are irreducibly complicated, difficult things. And I think what Krishna Devata has been emphasizing, I think, is if we really are compassionate, and if we can somehow, if we're just Krishna conscious, really Krishna conscious, and really something we haven't, mentioned so much as, but still, I think it's in my heart, it's in KD's heart. And that ultimately we really depend on Krishna to give us the right words to speak, and to really represent Krishna. Because inevitably, as individual souls, we have, we are ourselves, and we act as ourselves, and every soul is unique. And so it's sort of a balance of really being yourself, being true to yourself, at the same time, really trying hard to let Krishna speak for you. And Krishna knows that we have to be ourselves, but at the same time, in a situation like that, I would really pray very hard for Krishna to kind of give me the right words to speak.
Did you want to add anything to that, KD?
Yeah, I think this is where some of the really dangerous territory is. I also have empathy for this situation. I like to just also, there's often, this is the first question that comes up with abusive gurus. What about the disciples? And unfortunately, the question itself has been used to negate the victims over and over and over. And so the question itself is problematic. What about the disciples? So the question should be, well, what about the guru? What about the victim? Let's ask those questions. How we support the disciples is another thing. Then we also have to address how they attack advocates of the victim or the victim themselves. So many victims have been told not to be offensive.
Really?
Yes, because why would you offend and criticize a great devotee, Maharaj, and speak such lies?
Oh God.
So that's why I'm saying the most important first. So if we talk about first responders to a victim or to a situation, first responders need to, one, acknowledge the victim. It has to come first. Not the institution, not the guru, not the disciples. They're always talked about first. What about the victims? Period. That has to come number one. And then we can create empathy and space for healing for everyone. But when we understand the impact of abuse, including spiritual abuse, including what happens to a victim once they speak, and the secondary levels of abuse start to happen, and this is where some of the spiritual abuse happens. They're told, not to criticize. They're told, the great devotees and all of those things. And so the whole thing is gaslit in the name of Krishna. And so then the name of Krishna is weaponized. The words of scriptures and the Gita are weaponized to crush the victims.
Hearing from you, an idea came to my mind where I'd like to balance what I said about, I mean, we should have compassion, obviously, for disciples who are not, and that is really, if a truly, let's say, kind of really bad situation is created for the disciples, I think it's a guru's fault. Because the guru, if a guru uses whatever, moral authority he or she has with the disciples to make it very clear that I appreciate your love for me, you appreciate what I've done for you and preaching and whatever, but all of us, me and my disciples, just what KD said. I mean, our first concern has to be for those people who were victimized, and there are actually many stories, Vaishnava stories, where someone who later became an advanced devotee did really horrible things. I mean, for example, Jai and Madai apparently were raping. I mean, sex abuse, were killing, committing murder. I mean, these people were really, and there's stories where a Vaishnava, and I think the more the guru is, let's say, or someone who, I understand you think it shouldn't be a guru. I understand that, but let's say if someone is in that position, that followers, and they did these things, I think it's the leader who has to get way out in front of the curve and insist that the disciples first think of the victims. And ironically, I think, and this, I think, if I can just be honest, I think one of the failings of some of the people who were widely perceived as not being really profoundly repentant. And that is that I think ultimately a true disciple, seeing that this person I'm following and who did very bad things earlier in his life is actually profoundly and in the first instance concerned with the victims. And I think the guru sets that example that your first concern should not be with me, it should actually be with these people. And for the rest of my life, I'll be very ashamed of this. And there's actually a lot of this in Vaishnava history where someone became some kind of prominent figure and just profoundly regretted and was ashamed of earlier activities. And there's even Vaishnava songs that teach us how to express that, because where Vaishnavas who didn't do horrible things, but they express in very, very heavy self-deprecating language how ashamed they are. And so there is a model for that. And so if it is a real conflict for the disciples, in a sense, I think it's a guru who again failed to really instill in the followers first compassion for the victims. So I really like your point, KD. I'm really glad that I heard all these points you're making.
Thank you.
Here's another question. I'm again mindful it must be about 9 o'clock in the evening or something for you, so please do signal when you...
I'm going to give you my regular rate. I'm not going to charge you overtime. I'm very merciful.
Very merciful, thank you. Again, this is a version of a point that someone's making in a question. In instances of historic abuse, where it's actually very difficult to... the standard of evidence, I believe, for instance, in civil prosecution is not the same as in criminal prosecution.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? The burden of evidence.
The standard of evidence in civil law is a little different than it is with a criminal law. In criminal law, where there are very exacting sentences and so on, beyond reasonable doubt is the standard of proof, whereas preponderance of evidence is the civil case. So hence the O.J. Simpson was found guilty in a civil court, couldn't kind of get that verdict otherwise, but on technicalities. So almost a bias in favor of the accused in that sense. And I believe preponderance of evidence is the same ICPO standard. And if we think about it, yes, there's always going to be stigma attached to somebody who's even accused, what to speak of found guilty. But in essence, most of the time, the punishment, I'm not even sure if it's truly a punishment, is more of a timeout. It's more of an insulation. Can't give class, maybe can't reside on an ISKCON property, and so on. So do you have a view as to how, particularly with historic cases, Vaishnavas can properly weigh up evidence and decide what is appropriate and even what kind of restrictions are appropriate and so on?
I would say that we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel, and that in these cases, like for example, in the case that I mentioned where I was dissatisfied with the procedure, because I know the accused person, I would not want to, I would want to distance myself from the procedure. I mean, the last thing in the world I would want to do is try to influence the outcome. And all I'm asking for is that, qualified ISKCON people, and here's a jurisprudential thing, because someone may have a master's degree in this or that related to child care or child abuse, but inevitably, because there's evidence presented, there's a judgment, there's punishment, and so on. This is a judicial field. And so all I ask for is that the leaders of ISKCON study what sort of consensus standards are in civilized societies. And so if, as you said, it turns out that for civil cases, it's preponderance, in criminal cases, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, and so on, I don't feel qualified to reinvent jurisprudence. And so all I want to see is a professionalism where ISKCON meets appropriate standards of justice. And if that happens, it's none of my business what the judgment is, because I'm not the judge. I don't want to be the judge. That's all I want. Fair process.
I know ICPO, despite it being very early in the morning in the UK, ICPO are watching, and hopefully they'll also clarify precisely their position on these things, because I think it's a very reasonable question you've asked. I have a question here, or a comment here from Saraswati. I've noticed leaders will sometimes interfere in child protection cases to defend the abuser, but I've never seen or heard of leaders interfering to defend the victim, Maharaj. Have you yourself ever seen leaders interfering? So that sense, and I think KD brought it up as well, of where loyalties seem to lie, it does seem that we see many more instances of misplaced compassion than we do of, let's say, over-representing the child's interest. But again,
that would, thank you, Saraswati, that would correlate with general studies of some of the weaknesses and the problems with oligarchies. And I thank God, I was not personally involved in those things. I was off the GBC for a long time. And, the charge that when compassion has been shown, it's more often to the accused perpetrator than it is to the victim. It seems, to me, just looking at it from a distance, I think there's some truth in that. And so I have nothing to critique in what Saraswati said. I think it's a very important observation.
Do you have a view as to why it's more prevalent in religious circles? We see this problem in other churches and other religions where the instinct is to protect Father so-and-so and, relocate him or petition on his behalf. Is there something about religious sentiments which potentially cloud judgment even more than in secular society?
Brilliant question.
I'm playing catch up.
KD, do you want to jump in on that one?
I think that there is a particular, when we talk about absolute power corrupts absolutely, I can't think of any position more powerful than guru, actually, because this is like the God power. And they have incredible influence on people's personal lives and, you know, life views and all of that. So I think, so we were discussing this, a couple of us vigilante group bullies. So the number one offense to the holy name is to consider one's guru like an ordinary man. So I think that what happens is that when fundamentalism comes into play, we start to weaponize religion as power, is really what's happening, right? And so, and then the scriptures are being used to entrench power and disciples and all of that. So that's why the public trust, there's no checks and balances for ISKCON. And there's intense public trust placed in these men with no checks and balances.
Regarding, just if I could say one thing regarding checks and balances. Interestingly, there's, I think, a very significant way in which ISKCON is actually not following the God-given social system. And in a sense, Prabhupada set it up that way, that because Krishna says in the Gita, Chatu Varnya Mayasrishtam, that I created the system for Varnas. I believe it is quite intentional on Krishna's part, and as everyone knows, you know, I speak for Krishna. But I think it was who says Guru? I can't believe some people think Guru.
Okay, what did Krishna say?
Oh yeah, so that I mean, it's clear that Krishna has separated the two most powerful communities in society, which are the people that have religious authority, which can be very powerful, as we saw in Iran with the Iranian, you know, revolution against the Shah, and the political military wing. In ISKCON, these two powers, you know, the Brahmin and the Kshatriya, are merged into one body. And if you look at, like, you read Mahabharata and Bhagavatam, you see there it is like a balance where these two powers are separated. And it's just like in, for example, in the American government, they have three, you know, different branches of government, which was very consciously, intentionally meant to balance them, so one branch could not become too powerful. And so Prabhupada, it's the first statement in his will that the GBC is the ultimate managing authority for the entire ISKCON. Interesting, he said managing, didn't say like theological or spiritual, but still managing has been interpreted to mean that, because you have to be able to manage everything. So I think that's a real challenge for ISKCON. How do we? So I would suggest this, going back to you, KD, as sort of the Joan of Arc of ISKCON. I mean, I think that this NGO idea, in a sense, provides, because it's often said like a free press is the fourth branch of government. I think in ISKCON, given that in terms of the official exercise of power in ISKCON, that you have the same people being gurus, or, you know, having the last word on theological disputes, and at the same time having the political power. And by political here, I don't mean in a derogatory sense, I mean the original sense of political, that which concerns the exercise of power.
Right.
So I think that what's desperately needed, I mean, they have a Sabha now, and that was a step in the right direction.
A what?
Sabha. Yeah, it's an ISKCON. It's they created like a lower house of government, which can, like, for example, the GBC passes a resolution, and they think that's crazy. You know, they can like remand it, send it back to the GBC. So then the GBC can still pass it, but it requires a higher majority, which makes it more difficult to pass. So, but I think powerful NGOs speaking out, I think you shouldn't underestimate the power of, let's say, concerned, articulate citizens, and to form groups. In fact, in the paper I wrote, I should send you a copy of that, I gave two examples where very important decisions were made by the GBC, but it was like the tail wagging the dog. It was because of pressure. I mean, there was a case of anyway, there was a case of a non-ISKCON guru, Indian guru, who I'm quite convinced on this was having a lot more and more influence in ISKCON and preaching certain doctrines, which I'm absolutely sure are not exactly our philosophy. And but I won't get into all the technical theology. But in any case, what happened is the GBC, nothing new here, because there were some senior GBC men all entangled in that, and they didn't want to discipline them. And so it just kept drifting and drifting. And what happened is the second and third level of ISKCON managers and temple presidents, regional secretaries, sannyasis, they were up in arms. They were outraged, and they started circulating petitions, and they actually sort of forced the GBC to act. And so if you look at the way ISKCON actually has functioned historically in terms of power dynamics and things, it is possible. There were some GBC members who were absolutely hell-bent on destroying Krishna West. I mean, that was their dream in life. And they used all kinds of underhanded techniques to do so, I might add. And but because there was so much popular support, they had to deal with it. They didn't want to discipline these very big ISKCON leaders, but the lower echelons forced them to do that. And there was another case I just can't remember right now, but so, I mean, historical precedent, what we know just from sociology and history. So I really believe that attitude of kind of like going, like, I know you speak out. I mean, but I think if you explicitly, consciously want to influence ISKCON and you circulate petitions, you give your speeches, and I mean, you have a bully pulpit, because I mean, there's a lot of people that you reach. There's a lot of people who respect you, admire you, and listen to you, who frankly would not give that same degree of attention to the GBC. And so there is a diversity. There are different constituencies. And I think you and other devotees like you who, are articulate, principled, intelligent, can really play a powerful role in ISKCON. It's not just about the ultimate managing authority. It is possible to change ISKCON by persuading. And that's the Brahminical system. That, and I still think you're a Brahmini in many ways, but anyway.
I was hoping for a queen,
We can negotiate that.
It doesn't really matter. The point isn't that.
I know, I'm joking. So, but I think that, I mean, I was in Prabhupada's room so many times when parents brought their little kids in. Because in those days, all the kids were, almost all the kids were little. And there was one thing Prabhupada always said, and it entered my heart and I never forgot it. He would look at us, like really transfix us in his gaze. And he would say, take care of them. They are the future hope. Mm-hmm. And so based on Prabhupada's instruction to me many times, I see you as the future hope. And so I would just encourage you and other good devotees like you. We need a strong citizen voice in ISKCON, loyal opposition. We need NGOs. And please don't underestimate the power that you can have by persuading good devotees. And
I'm going to tell the GBC you told me that.
What's that?
I said, I'm going to tell the GBC you told me that if I make enough noise, they'll listen to me.
Well, actually, they're already going to find out because I already,
They already know me because I make noise. So.
And they know me. And I've already incriminated myself so deeply in this little podcast.
Well, on that note, Maharaj, at 2 hours 15, I'm inclined to give you whatever's left of your evening back. I want to express a massive thank you. Srila Prabhupada often talks about preaching is taking a risk. And I always thought, well, yeah, maybe if you're behind the Iron Curtain or something. But it does strike me that this, in this day and age of cancel culture and so on, even taking a position on anything potentially puts you at great risk. So thank you for stepping into the fray on such an emotionally charged issue and providing some real thoughts. We're hoping that more and more ISKCON leaders will follow your cue and realize that this is not an issue that we can keep sort of brushing under the carpet. It's not an issue that we need to, avoid because it's deeply uncomfortable. And often exposes the shadow side of the movement that we just don't want to look at. So thank you for being so generous in terms of allowing us to perhaps breach protocols from time to time and talk over the top of you.
Oh, it wouldn't be funny if there were. It wouldn't be fun if there were no breaches. You know, I say like, KD, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you breaching? And
yeah, well, that's why I always appreciate it, because you don't mind if I talk over you a little. And you know, it is really an honor to have an opportunity to have proper discourse, and I feel like we have made some progress in finding common ground and agreement and progress. So that's really important.
And massive thanks to you as well, KD. Sorry, Maharaj, you finish.
No, I just wanted to thank both of you. Damodara, you were, you know, for someone that likes to talk like me, you were a perfect host. And, and of course, KD, I'm really happy that we're, you know, we can do this again. And I'm really grateful to, you know, to you both for facilitating this. And I've learned, I mean, I think I have a better understanding now than I did before. And yeah, I'm happy that we're talking to each other.
Let's hope that the comments continue to pour in, because there's a lot that's going on there. Thank you also, KD, for making such a passionate case for the voices that are often just not represented in these things. That's really important. So I propose that Ananda Leela perhaps puts us back into purgatory and lets our listeners go, and we can sign off. Thank you all for watching. Please keep it civil and impassioned in the comment sections. Hare Krishna.
Jai KD. Hare Krishna.